the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor, so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destructive suction tube. So I was in...
We'll come back right to that. Again, you're listening to Redline here on 910 AM. I'm Ben Clay Thompson, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the war in Vietnam. Given at Riverside Church 5 decades ago, Bill, what is interesting here, Doctor, it's interesting. I'm just thinking we're still dealing with the same forces, China, Russia, Hanoi. Dr. King said in his speech, his audience is not in Hanoi, his audience was not in China, and his audience was not in Russia, but his audience was the United States. And now he's moving to basically establishing how foreign ventures like the war in Vietnam and other ventures that this nation has embarked on over the years actually have stolen from the poor in America.
Well, that's absolutely so. It's ironic that 50 years ago we were talking about the distinction between do we provide weapons of war or do we provide for those who are in poverty? That's the same debate that is not going on today, but it should be. And that's where we look to people like Reverend Dr. Barber, who is raising the issue in terms of the Poor People's Campaign today. Most people, if you ask them about the United States and war, they would not realize that the United States has been continuously at war somewhere in the world for virtually 30 years. And those are resources that are being devoted to something other than addressing the needs of poor people here in America.
Billions of dollars in ventures that not only, not taking care of people here, but also with war comes lives, as Dr. King talked about. They just, skilled men and women, their lives been taken away as well.
That's particularly so. I mean, when you look at Vietnam,
so it's double jeopardy, actually.
It creates double jeopardy in it. We saw it during the course of the Vietnam War, where people who were poor were often drafted into the army and sent to Vietnam to fight for the freedoms that they did not enjoy here in America.
Dr. King talks about that. They fight for some sort of a freedom or liberation that does not exist in the ghettos. Let's do this. Let's go to Terrence, and we'll come back to that speech. If you have a question or comment on social media, on Facebook, you can also fire that question. Terrence, go ahead with your question or comment.
Hey, Baker, how you doing today?
Good.
Baker, I think this is a good show that you have here, man.
Thank you.
In regards to this, what you're saying in the topic, the King, it's amazing how this country spends so much money on these wars, billions and billions of dollars. And do we not know all of the many problems that could be solved with those billions and billions of dollars?
Right.
Just having an urban agenda, they could go in some of these big cities and, clear out so many problems, in particular the crime.
Right.
So I think it's a good topic that you have, and I do think this country spends a lot of money on something that does not even make sense. It costs thousands of lives, over and over again. I want to say to you.
Thank you, brother. To Terrence's point, Bill, is the consequence of engaging in foreign wars is also what we see on the streets of Detroit and the streets around the nation, and that is homeless veterans sleeping under bridges, going to foreign ventures, engaging in foreign wars, defending liberties, as Dr. King said in this speech, and the war in Vietnam, about defending liberties that they don't have here at home. Come back home, and you come back home not only as an orphan, but come back home as a destitute, as homeless as you can be. And you have to go through hoops, you have to go through paperwork upon paperwork. And we've seen the Inspector General at the Department of Veteran Affairs, when they did an audit, that thousands of veterans actually died waiting for benefits from the government. I mean, the irony and the cruelty of war.
Well, it's the cruelty of a government that doesn't recognize what's truly important. And that's an issue that stretches back to the 1870s in terms of the care of veterans. In fact, the most infamous incident involving veterans was in 1932 which was a march by veterans who had been promised a bonus by the U.S. government, the veterans who had fought in World War I. And we're in the middle of the Depression, and they want the bonus because otherwise they're going to starve to death. And what did the U.S. government under Herbert Hoover do? It sent the U.S. Army into the camps in Washington, D.C. to evict these people. Some of them were hurt, several were killed. And this is not new. I mean, it's one of those things where we look at it now. How many folks do we know who are veterans who are not getting the care they deserve?
Right. No question. Let's go back to Riverside Church. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a foreign policy speech. The speech divided into two. Juxtaposing the war in Vietnam and the war on poverty, putting them together. Take a listen.
Increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and to attack it as such. Perhaps a more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the war was doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. It was sending their sons and their brothers and their husbands to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Holland. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel irony of watching Negro and white boys on TV screens as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. So we watch them in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of a poor village, but we realized that they would hardly live on the same block in Chicago. I could not be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. My third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of my experience in the ghettos of the North over the last 3 years, especially the last 3 summers. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and
the contradictions of American foreign policy, the contradictions of this democratic experience called the United States. Well, go fight foreign wars, but you come back home, you can sit together with those same white soldiers that you fought together with in Vietnam.
And what's most interesting about the Vietnam War was it actually created an environment where many of those soldiers who had not been together before they were sent to Vietnam, when they came back, they realized how wrong the system in the United States was. And many of those folks, white and black, were then in alliance with one another to oppose the war.
I had a godfather, George Haley, who died about two years ago, who was in the U.S. Air Force. I went to Morehouse and talked about just the contradictions of that, having to fight in a war, and then you can't sit side by side with those same soldiers that you came from the same nation with.
Well, and that raises an important point about something that we hear about today, and that is patriotism. And there's this false sense of if you oppose a policy that is wrong, you are being unpatriotic. And we saw that in 1967 after this speech. Dr. King was accused of being non-patriotic. He was accused of being a communist.
It was seen to his skeptics. It was an anti-American speech.
Well, and what people don't realize is they tried to put him in the box of being a civil rights leader. Dr. King, they forget there was a word in front of doctor, which was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. First and foremost, he was a Christian minister.
No question. Attorney Bill Noakes here with me. We're going deeper. The war in Vietnam, Dr. King's speech, perhaps the most important foreign policy speech given by a non-elected politician in American history. That speech remains so relevant, so consequential. Remember the names he mentioned in that speech. He said, my audience is not Hanoi, it is not China, it's not Russia. In 2018, we're still dealing with those geopolitical forces, Russia and China, in the equation of geopolitics. Yvonne Wesley on Facebook said, they sent back our men damaged. There's no question. Vietnam, the relics of Vietnam are still alive today. We'll be right back here on Redline.